To make me lose interest in him, Derek had me deliver a box of Durex to his apartment on a night with a raging blizzard. The box was wrapped in a brown paper drugstore bag, making me assume he was sick. I was in such a frantic rush to get to him that I slipped and took a hard fall on the icy road. But when the door opened and I saw the warm, intimate glow of the apartment behind him, everything became painfully clear. From that night on, I began to slip out of his life. When he injured his knee during a major basketball game, his roommate tracked me down in the hallway. Derek took a really bad fall, Grace. Are you going to go see him? I shook my head. Even when he got into a serious car accident a few weeks later, I didn't step foot in the hospital. When the winter break arrived and he asked to drive home together, I manufactured excuses to stay behind. I still have exams to study for. But then, he ran into me on the street while I was walking hand in hand with my boyfriend. His eyes narrowed, a cold, sharp edge cutting through his voice. I thought you were in the middle of exams, Grace. And since when are you dating? Why didn't I know about this? I used to be a permanent fixture at every single one of Derek's basketball games. He was Columbia's star computer science major, notorious for being untouchable. Most of the university sports clubs had to drag students in by their ID numbers to fill the rosters, but the basketball team never had that problem. Whenever Derek was on the court, the bleachers were packed to the rafters. He was the campus ice prince, completely aloof and detached. During his first 2 years, he hadn't dated a single person, leaving everyone to whisper about who would finally be the one to melt his frozen heart. I was the only girl allowed within his inner circle. After a game, he would casually toss his sweat-dampened team jacket over my head, ruffle my hair, and offer a lazy, murmured, "I'm heading to the showers." The other girls would watch us with intense envy, and I quietly let myself drown in the sweet, dizzying warmth of that ambiguity. I was naive enough to believe his refusal to date anyone else was because he was waiting for me, until that snowy night when he chose a different way to reject me, a way far more cruel than a simple face-to-face no. He wanted to humiliate me, to make me feel like a pathetic clown. Since that night, I had stopped reaching out to him. I stopped attending his games, choosing to spend my Saturdays tucked away in the quiet corners of the library instead. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, my phone buzzed. It was Zach, Derek's roommate. "Hey, Grace. Derek took a nasty spill on the court. Are you coming over to check on him?" Hearing that he was hurt still sent a sharp, involuntary pang through my chest, but I had my pride, and I had my dignity. "I'm not on campus today, Zach. I won't be able to make it." Zach let out a quiet sigh of surprise. "No wonder you weren't in the stands today. He kept looking for you." I offered a quiet murmur of agreement and hung up. Leaving the library, I grabbed a lonely dinner at the dining hall and immediately returned to my books. Derek and I had entered a silent, unspoken truce. We hadn't exchanged a single message in over 2 weeks. In truth, I had always been the one driving our connection. The moment I stopped reaching out, our world simply fell apart. Besides, he had a girlfriend now. It was only right that we stop speaking. The night of the blizzard, Derek had texted me, asking me to deliver a package to his apartment. Earlier that morning, I had finally mustered the courage to slip a handwritten confession letter into his locker. He hadn't acknowledged it all day. It wasn't until the snow began to pile up on the pavement that he finally sent a message, telling me he had left a bag with Zach for me to bring to his place. By the time I ran to his building, my breath was coming in ragged gasps. Derek stood in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. "Thanks," he murmured, reaching for the bag. My fingers were so stiff from the biting cold that my grip slipped. The paper bag tore, and its contents spilled across the welcome mat. I looked down. It wasn't cold medicine, it was a sleek blue box of condoms. I froze, the breath catching in my throat. Derek crouched down, his expression entirely natural as he gathered the items. We locked eyes for a long, quiet second. My gaze drifted past his shoulder, peering into the warm, dimly lit apartment behind him. A girl's slender silhouette was visible in the soft glow of the hallway. She was wrapped in his sheets, her bare shoulders pale against the dark fabric. The air in the room felt thick with a lazy post-coital warmth. A heavy, suffocating pressure settled over my chest, and my entire world seemed to crumble into dust. The freezing wind howling outside was nothing compared to the absolute numbness spreading through my veins. Then the girl's soft, sleepy voice drifted out to the doorway. "Derek, are you coming back to bed?" Derek looked back at me, a faint, polite smile playing on his lips. "My girlfriend is waiting, Grace. I won't keep you. It's freezing out there, so be careful on your way back." I didn't even have the strength to ask him when he had started seeing her, or why he hadn't told me. The heavy door clicked shut in my face. The moment the elevator doors closed on the first floor, I collapsed against the wall and began to sob. The bag had been a standard brown paper drugstore bag, which was why I had desperately assumed he was sick. I had run so fast through the storm that I had taken a hard fall on the black ice, scraping my knee so badly it was still throbbing. As I stumbled out into the freezing night, my phone rang. Derek's name flashed on the screen. Grace. His voice came through cool and detached. Wait in the lobby. I told Kevin to come pick you up. I didn't dare speak, terrified that the tremble in my voice would betray my tears. I simply let out a quiet murmur of assent and hung up. I had no intention of waiting. At this hour, the subways were delayed. The buses had stopped running, and finding a cab in a blizzard was practically impossible. But I kept my head down, burying my face in my jacket as I began the long, freezing walk back to my dorm. The profound, aching weight in my chest made me entirely numb to the cold. If a pair of strong, steady hands hadn't caught my shoulders, I probably would have collapsed in the snow without even realizing it. A tall, dark silhouette stepped into my path, shielding me from the biting wind. The pale street lamp illuminated his sharp, striking features, and the snow dusted across his dark hair. Grace? My mind scrambled to place him. Kevin Pierce. He was Derek's former roommate from freshman year. We had met briefly at a campus party, and though we hadn't spoken much, his quiet, intense presence had left a lasting impression on me. He was exceptionally handsome, though far more reserved and aloof than Derek. Kevin? I whispered, my eyelashes heavy with frost. He nodded, his dark eyes searching my face. Didn't I tell you to wait for me in the lobby? Despite the freezing temperatures, a light sheen of sweat clung to his forehead. His chest was heaving slightly, his breath curling into white plumes in the dark. He didn't sound angry or demanding. He simply sounded relieved to have found me. Where were you planning to go? He asked softly. I realized with a jolt that the dorms had already locked for the night. There was no way back inside. I suppose I'll find a hotel, I murmured. Kevin's lips twitched with a faint, dry amusement. The blizzard has shut down the transit lines. Every hotel in the area is booked solid or charging triple. Come to my place. Seeing the hesitation in my eyes, he glanced down at his watch. It's past midnight, Grace. I have an early morning flight to catch to go visit my family for the weekend. Once I drop you off at my apartment, I'm heading straight to the airport. You'll have the place to yourself. It's much safer than wandering the streets in a storm. I looked at his sincere, calm expression and nodded. Okay. Thank you, Kevin. A fleeting smile touched his lips, so brief I almost thought I had imagined it. You're freezing, he muttered, quickly unbuttoning his heavy wool coat and wrapping it around my shoulders. He unwound his thick scarf and wrapped it gently around my neck, his fingers brushing my chin. When we reached his apartment, he set his suitcase by the door and looked down at my torn jeans. You fell? How did you know? I asked, startled. Kevin retrieved a small medical kit from the bathroom and placed it in my hands. Can you apply the ointment yourself? I nodded. He grabbed his suitcase, offering a quiet nod before heading out into the storm. Lock the door behind me, Grace. Text me when you're back in your dorm tomorrow. I watched him leave, feeling a strange, quiet warmth bloom in my chest for the first time all night. Though Derek had never formally replied to my letter, his actions had given me an unmistakable answer. He didn't love me, and so I quietly stepped back, erecting a polite, impenetrable wall between us. When I walked into my dorm room, my roommates immediately swarmed around my desk. Grace, did Derek actually get a girlfriend? I paused, placing my books on the shelf, and nodded. Yes. Sophia sighed. I knew it. I ran into him downstairs earlier. He was dropping off Victoria Ashford, the law major. Jade joined in, her eyes wide. They looked like something out of a magazine. It's almost unfair. That night, the campus forums were practically overflowing with threads about them. Heartbroken. Columbia's golden boy is officially off the market. Honestly, they're perfect together. Both of them are gorgeous and wealthy. It's a visual masterpiece. Thank goodness. I was getting tired of seeing that plain girl trailing behind him like a shadow. Derek was always out of her league anyway. My chest tightened slightly as I scrolled through the comments. I closed the app, looking at my roommates. They really do make a lovely couple, I said quietly. And it was the truth. Everyone on campus thought so. Derek and I were childhood friends. Our families lived next door to each other in Greenwich, Connecticut. For years, it was just him and his mother, and we had always assumed his father was out of the picture. But when we were in middle school, a sleek, black luxury sedan parked at the end of our street, drawing the curious gazes of all our neighbors. It turned out Derek's father was the CEO of Shaw Enterprises, one of the most powerful developers on the East Coast. Derek's mother had refused to leave our quiet neighborhood, so his father simply bought the historic estate at the end of the lane and renovated it from top to bottom. Derek had always excelled at everything, easily outshining me in academics. I had barely scraped by to get into Columbia, while he had been accepted with honors. Now that we were of college age, my mother frequently brought him up during our weekly phone calls, dropping heavy hints. Derek's mother and I were just talking, Grace. It would be so lovely if you two ended up together. Back then, those words would make my cheeks burn with a shy, hopeful heat. But now, the mere mention of his name made me want to run in the opposite direction. I was sitting in the dining hall with Sophia when Derek's tall, unmistakable figure appeared near the entrance. He stood out effortlessly in the crowd, his broad shoulders easily clearing the students around him. Sophia nudged my arm, pointing toward the door. Grace, your boy is here. Hearing that old designation made my chest ache. Sophia, please don't say that. He has a girlfriend, and we aren't close anymore. Are you finished eating? Let's go. As we stood up to leave, Derek and Zach began walking in our direction. Derek's eyes locked onto mine, but I quickly averted my gaze, guiding Sophia toward the exit without looking back. It was the first time I had actively ignored him. That evening, I received a text from him. Have you been busy lately? I stared at the notification, waiting until midnight to type out a brief, formal reply. Yes. We have a lot of final projects this week. A few days later, our department hosted a guest lecture. Attendance was mandatory, and the seats were assigned by student ID. To my dismay, Derek was seated in the same row. As he walked down the aisle toward me, I quickly spotted an empty seat a few rows down, nestled between two strangers. I slid into it before he could reach me, letting out a quiet sigh of relief. Derek's eyes darkened as he watched me sit down. Once the lecture started, my phone buzzed in my lap. Why didn't you sit with me? There was an empty space. I typed back a simple lie. Oh, sorry. I didn't see you. When the lecture ended, I slipped out through the side exit before the crowd could block the aisles. Why did you run off? His next text arrived. I manufactured another excuse. My roommate forgot her student ID and needed me to bring it to her exam room. An hour later, my phone rang again. It was Zach, his voice frantic. Grace, thank goodness you picked up. Are you in your dorm? Derek got into a bad car accident. He's at Columbia Presbyterian. My fingers tightened around my phone, a cold spike of panic shooting through my chest. But then, I forced myself to breathe. I can't go, Zach. I have plans today. You should call Victoria. Zach let out a strained, dry laugh. Why on earth would I call her? I remembered my brief encounter with Victoria in the library courtyard a few days prior. She had stopped me, offering a polite, razor-sharp smile. Grace, right? Derek's little childhood friend. I'll be honest with you. I absolutely despise the concept of a childhood best friend when it comes to men. I'm sure you understand. Nobody wants their boyfriend to have a surrogate sister hovering around. I had offered a tight, forced smile and nodded in agreement. Zach, I said now, my voice steady, it's not appropriate for me to go. Call his girlfriend. I hung up. The next morning, I was woken up by a call. I answered sleepily, my voice raspy. Hello? Grace? Derek's voice came through, thick and exhausted. I'm in the hospital. Annoyed at having my sleep disrupted, I muttered. Then call a doctor, Derek. I'm not a physician. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. And in that quiet, I finally woke up, realizing exactly what I had just said. Derek didn't speak for several long seconds. When he finally did, his voice was strangely quiet. You really don't care anymore? Grace sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes. The old her would have panicked, apologized a dozen times, rushed to the hospital with breakfast and medicine. Instead, she simply glanced at the clock. It was barely 6 a.m. I hope you recover quickly, she said politely. Goodbye. She ended the call. The hospital room fell silent. Zach looked between Derek and the disconnected phone. She hung up on you? Derek stared at the screen. For the first time in years, Grace had been the one to end the conversation. His chest tightened with an unfamiliar irritation. No, he muttered. She must still be angry. Zach almost laughed. Still, after everything that had happened, Derek thought this was just temporary anger? You know, Zach said carefully, maybe she's finally moved on. Derek frowned immediately. Impossible. Why? Grace has liked me since we were kids. The certainty in his voice made Zach speechless. He had never realized Derek viewed Grace's feelings as something permanent, as if they would simply exist forever. Over the next week, Derek was discharged from the hospital. The first thing he did after returning to campus was look for Grace. Except, she seemed to have disappeared. She no longer waited outside his computer science building after class. She wasn't in the basketball stands. She wasn't at the cafe, where they always met. Even the path she usually took back to the dorm had changed. It was as though she had quietly edited him out of her daily routine. The realization bothered him far more than he expected. Meanwhile, Grace's life had become surprisingly peaceful. Without constantly revolving around Derek's schedule, she suddenly discovered how much free time she actually had. She joined Sophia at weekend art markets. She started going to yoga classes. She even accepted invitations she'd spent years declining because Derek had practices or games. One Saturday afternoon, she wandered into a small independent bookstore. She reached for a novel on the top shelf. At the same time, another hand reached for the exact same copy.
Oh,
Grace looked up.
Kevin.
He withdrew his hand immediately. You saw it first. She smiled. No, you can have it. I've already read it. You have? Kevin nodded. The ending is worth losing sleep over. Grace laughed. That's quite a recommendation. It was the first genuine laugh she'd had in weeks. Kevin looked at her for a moment before speaking. You look better. She blinked. Do I? You smiled with your eyes. He said it so matter-of-factly that she couldn't help laughing again. You always give unusual compliments. Their observations. They ended up walking through the bookstore together. Kevin wasn't particularly talkative, but every recommendation he made happened to match her taste perfectly. By the time they left, they had exchanged numbers. Not because of Derek. Simply because they enjoyed talking. Unfortunately, Columbia's campus wasn't large enough to avoid someone forever. A few days later, Grace and Kevin were sitting outside the engineering building sharing coffee between classes. Kevin was explaining why one of his professors had accidentally crashed an entire research server. Grace laughed so hard, she nearly spilled her drink. At that exact moment, a basketball rolled to a stop near their feet. Grace looked up.
Derek.
The practice court was just across the lawn. Several teammates stood behind him. His eyes weren't on the ball. They were fixed on Kevin. Kevin calmly picked up the basketball and tossed it back with perfect aim. Here. Derek caught it without looking away from Grace. You seem busy lately. Grace nodded politely. I am. You've been avoiding me. I'm living my own life. His jaw tightened. You never answer my question. What question? When did you and Kevin become so close? Before Grace could respond, Kevin stood. We're getting lunch. He looked at Grace. Ready? She smiled.
Yeah.
The two of them walked away together. Neither looked back. Behind them, one of Derek's teammates muttered under his breath. I've never seen Grace ignore you before. Another added, quietly. I thought everyone knew she liked you. Derek continued staring at the two retreating figures. For reasons he couldn't explain, watching Grace smile at someone else felt infinitely worse than the pain from his injured knee. For the first time since childhood, he realized that the place beside her was no longer being saved for him. Derek stood rooted to the spot long after Grace and Kevin disappeared around the corner. One of his teammates slapped him lightly on the shoulder. Practice, Captain. He didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the empty path. Yeah. That evening, Derek knocked on Zach's bedroom door. Zach looked up from his laptop. You've been weird all day. Derek leaned against the doorframe. I have a question. Shoot. Has Grace been spending a lot of time with Kevin? Zach nearly choked on his coffee. So, that's what's bothering you. Derek frowned. I'm just asking. Zach closed his laptop with a sigh. They've been talking for a while. How long? Since the snowstorm. Derek's expression stiffened. The night Kevin picked her up?
Yeah.
I told him to. You told him to make sure she got home safely, Zach corrected. You didn't tell him to become her friend. Derek's brows drew together. They're dating? I don't know. But they looked happy, Zach supplied. Derek fell silent. Across campus, Grace was helping Kevin cook dinner in his apartment. You chop vegetables like you're apologizing to them, Kevin observed. Grace looked down at the uneven carrot slices. I've never been accused of being an aggressive cook. Kevin reached over. Here. He gently adjusted her grip on the knife. Keep your fingers curled. His hand was warm against hers. There. She copied the motion. The slices came out perfectly even. Her eyes widened. Oh. Kevin smiled faintly. See. You'd make a surprisingly patient teacher. I've been told I have to be. They ate while sitting on opposite sides of the kitchen island, talking about everything except Derek. Books. Family traditions. Embarrassing childhood stories. Grace found herself laughing more in 2 hours than she had in months. When she left, Kevin handed her a small container. You forgot dessert. You packed me leftovers? I made too much. She smiled. Thank you. As she stepped into the hallway, Kevin spoke again. Grace. She turned. I'm glad you're smiling again. For a second, she forgot how to answer. Me too. A week later, Columbia held its annual winter charity gala. Students from every department attended. Grace almost skipped it. Sophia refused to let her. You've hidden in the library long enough. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers bathed the room in warm golden light. Sophia suddenly grabbed Grace's arm. Oh no. What? Derek. Grace turned. He had just entered wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. Beside him stood Victoria in a deep emerald evening gown. They looked exactly like the campus posts had described. Elegant. Perfect. Victoria noticed Grace first. She leaned toward Derek and whispered something. The two of them walked over. Sophia immediately excused herself, sensing trouble. Victoria smiled pleasantly. Grace. Victoria. I heard you've become rather close with Kevin lately. Grace answered calmly. We're friends. Victoria tilted her head. I'm relieved. Grace blinked. Relieved? I'd hate for Kevin to be dragged into unnecessary misunderstandings. Before Grace could ask what she meant, Derek interrupted. Victoria. His tone was sharper than expected. She looked at him. What? That's enough. Victoria's smile faltered. I was only making conversation. I said that's enough. For the first time all evening, Derek looked directly at Grace. I'm sorry. Grace stared at him. She wasn't expecting an apology, especially not in front of his girlfriend. For what? She asked quietly. Derek hesitated. His lips parted, then closed again, because he suddenly realized something terrifying. There wasn't just one thing to apologize for. There were dozens. The ignored confession, the mixed signals, the late-night calls whenever he needed her, taking her loyalty for granted, sending her through a blizzard, making her deliver condoms to the apartment where another woman was waiting. Every memory surfaced at once. His throat tightened. Victoria looked between them, confusion creeping into her expression. Derek. He barely heard her. For the first time in his life, he saw the past exactly as Grace must have lived it, and it made him hate himself. Grace wasn't the type to heal by becoming a lovesick heroine all over again. She healed by remembering who she had been before Derek became the center of her world. Finals ended. The first thing Grace did wasn't text Kevin. It wasn't cry over Derek. It wasn't mope in her dorm. She booked herself a train ticket to New York. Sophia stared at her. You just decided this yesterday. Grace shrugged. I've lived 20 years letting other people decide my weekends. So now, I'm taking one for myself. She spent the entire Saturday wandering museums, buying overpriced pastries, getting hopelessly lost in Soho, and somehow ending up at a tiny jazz cafe. She filled her camera roll with terrible selfies. She sent exactly one picture to Kevin. Grace, I accidentally spent $30 on cheesecake. His reply came almost instantly. Kevin, was it worth it? She looked at the tiny slice. Grace, absolutely not. A minute later, Kevin, good. That means you'll let me make you a better one. Grace laughed loud enough that the waiter looked over. She didn't realize someone else had seen the message, because just as she slipped her phone into her coat, she heard a familiar voice. Grace. She turned. Derek. He was standing outside the cafe. A duffel bag hung over one shoulder. What are you doing here? She blinked. I was about to ask you the same thing. My father had meetings. Oh. The silence was almost comical. Once upon a time they could talk for hours. Now neither knew what to say. Finally Grace smiled politely. Well, enjoy New York. She walked around him. Derek suddenly spoke. You've changed. Grace stopped. I hope so. No. He searched for the words. You don't look at me anymore. She laughed softly. Derek. You used to know every expression on my face. I did. You'd know when I skipped breakfast. I did. You'd notice if I had a bad practice. I did. So why? His voice became quieter. Can't you even look at me now? Grace turned back. For the first time, there wasn't anger in her eyes. There wasn't heartbreak either. Only honesty. Because I finally realized something. What? I knew everything about you. She smiled faintly. But you knew almost nothing about me. Derek froze. Grace continued. You know my favorite color because you asked me when we were 6. You know I'm allergic to cats because my mom told yours. You know I like strawberry cake because your mother bakes it every birthday. She tilted her head. But, do you know what my major concentration is? Silence. My favorite author? Silence. What internship I applied for? Silence. My birthday plans this year? Silence. Each unanswered question landed like another punch. Grace wasn't accusing him. She wasn't even upset. She sounded bemused. You see? She smiled. I spent years learning everything about you. You never realized I had an entire life outside of being your Grace. The nickname hit him harder than if she'd shouted, Your Grace. Because that's exactly how he'd treated her. Like a permanent part of his life. Someone who would always be there. No matter what. Grace tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I hope your knee heals. And she gave him the same gentle smile she'd once reserved only for him. I hope you treat the next person who loves you more carefully. She walked away. This time, Derek didn't chase after her. Because for the first time, he understood that the person walking away wasn't trying to make him regret losing her. She simply wasn't waiting for him anymore. When Grace got back to campus Sunday evening, Kevin was sitting on the library steps with 2 paper cups of hot chocolate. You guessed my train. I checked the schedule. She raised an eyebrow. That's slightly creepy. I know, but statistically effective. She laughed. You really are a computer scientist. I am. He handed her one cup. So, was the cheesecake terrible? Grace took a sip of the hot chocolate. It was. Kevin nodded seriously. I'll fix that. You bake. I do. Confident. I'm ranked first in my lab. That's not the same skill. Kevin pretended to think. True. But confidence transfers. Grace burst out laughing again. Not because he was trying to impress her. Not because he was flirting dramatically. Just because he was funny in the driest, most unexpected way. She was simply enjoying the company of the person standing